How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
Hi, you're watching DNA Today, a multi-award-winning genetics podcast where we explore everything to do with genetics, from CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. We have won the Science and Medicine Podcast Award for many years now. We have hundreds of episodes, and we really hope you enjoy these conversations where we dive into so many genetic concepts. I'm Kira Dineen, a certified genetic counselor, and your host. Hi, you're listening to It Happened to Me, a rare disease and medical challenges podcast. The mission of our podcast is to support you, our listeners, and to create community as you confront the toughest challenges in life. All of us will experience health hardships. The real question is how we adapt. That's the focus of It Happened to Me, which wants to help you overcome limitations and live a full and satisfying life. Drawing on their own health challenges, co-hosts Cathy, Gildenhorn, and Beth Glassman interview guests who share stories and research to help you succeed in the face of difficult health obstacles. It happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.
Matt Goldstein is a physician, scientist, and entrepreneur. He founded companies, built R&D teams, and led strategy and execution of both preclinical research and clinical development. Matt was a partner at Related Sciences, a venture creation firm. As an entrepreneur at Third Rock Ventures, he spent a decade building and operating Third Rock portfolio companies. He was responsible for building and leading the immunology program at Tango Therapeutics, the centerpiece of Tango's strategic multi-billion-dollar partnership with Gilead Sciences. He also served as development head for Tango lead programs, which entered the clinic in first half of 2022.
Matt was a co-founder of Neon Therapeutics. He led translational medicine and early development through completion of their clinical study and initial public offering. He's a graduate of Swarthmore College and the MD PhD program at Stanford University, where he pioneered novel cancer immunotherapies in the lab of Ron Levy, MD. He completed his clinical training in internal medicine at Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's Hospital. He lives in Boston with his wife, Myra, their second daughter, Kaia, and son, Ezra. His oldest daughter, Havi, died on January 20th, 2021 of Tay-Sachs disease. Matthew, we are deeply sorry for the loss of your daughter, Havi. Today, we want to honor her memory by educating others about Tay-Sachs. For those that don't know about Tay-Sachs, can you explain what the disease is and how it affects individuals who have it?
Sure. And first, Cathy and Beth, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be on the show with you guys, and it's a great pleasure to be able to talk about Hav and share her story and share our story. And hopefully it serves as an inspiration to others to think about preventive genetic screening when they're thinking about becoming future parents and obviously in a whole variety of other areas. So Tay-Sachs is sort of one of the hallmark recessive genetic diseases. You almost in some ways as a young Jewish person learn about it in Hebrew school to some extent, and in high school biology, early medical school, it is one of the classic case studies that people use to describe recessive genetic diseases or inherited diseases. In order to develop Tay-Sachs disease, a child needs to inherit a mutated DNA from both the mother and the father. They need 2 copies of this mutated DNA sequence in order to develop the disease. And that mutated DNA sequence ultimately results in a protein. In the case of Tay-Sachs, it's a protein called hex A. And that protein ends up not functioning very well, and not functioning in the way that it should when the DNA that encodes that protein is mutated. And what that protein normally does inside the cells of the central nervous system is to function as a somewhat of a sort of recycling or sort of garbage dump type of process. And over time, cells will recycle and reuse components as they grow and divide. And hex A is one of the proteins or enzymes that accomplishes that recycling. And when it's broken or malfunctioning due to DNA mutations that encode that protein, you get a buildup of what is called GM2 ganglioside. It's a lipid or a fatty molecule that ends up building up in cells of the central nervous system. And eventually those cells get so full of that lipid that they are no longer able to function and they die. And as you can imagine, as cells of the central nervous system stop functioning and start dying, that functions controlled by our nervous system start to be impaired. And so children, there's a whole range of Tay-Sachs disease, a variety of different flavors in terms of when it first shows up. In the case of our daughter, Havi, she had infantile Tay-Sachs. So in that case, a child who is born with Tay-Sachs will have some normal development or will appear somewhat normal for a period of time, but then will start to lose functions. They'll lose motor functions, eventually the ability to move their arms and legs, to feed themselves, to be able to pull up or stand up even, which is very rare in this population. Loss of vision, loss of hearing, and eventually loss of ability to eat or speak. And as many of the organ systems lose their ability to function, infantile Tay-Sachs and Tay-Sachs in all of its flavors will eventually result in death. And the average age for kids with infantile Tay-Sachs is between 2 and 4 years old at the time of death. So it's a particularly horrible form of this disease, and one of the reasons why it's been studied for so long, and fortunately that we've made great progress in preventing it. Unfortunately, not in our case, obviously.
Matt, I just wanted to say how terribly sorry I am. And I can imagine, not only as a father, but then as a doctor, to understand what your daughter was going through and to know what her prognosis was going to be had to have been almost ignorance would have been better. And to know what she was going to suffer with must have been excruciating. My heart just breaks to hear this story. And thank you very much for agreeing to share your story with us. And hopefully we can talk about screening and preconception screening, and through you, we can get the word out that your sadness doesn't have to be everyone's sadness, that we can do something about this together. So in furthering that goal, can you talk a little bit about the pre-screening, preconception screening that you and your wife went through before Havi?
Yeah, so most Ashkenazi Jews, fortunately, are aware of carrier screening. And as I said earlier, it is something that it feels like you're taught in Hebrew school. And
Yes.
we undertook preconception carrier screening. So when we were thinking about getting pregnant, my wife went to her OBGYN to get tested. He ordered a panel of diseases that are more common in the Ashkenazi Jewish population. And my wife found out that she was a carrier for Tay-Sachs and another disease called spinal muscular atrophy. When she got those results, the OBGYN instructed me to go get tested. And so I did. I went to my physician with those results and asked to be tested as well. Obviously, the concern is for both parents being carriers for the same disease. And unfortunately, that physician ended up ordering the wrong test for Tay-Sachs disease and reported me as not a carrier, which my wife and I were obviously so excited about, and went ahead and conceived naturally. And Havi was born on our wedding anniversary, September 4th, 2018. And we had no idea until the day of her diagnosis, obviously.
Oh, this is a heartbreaker. I am so sorry. You know, the human element, I guess we learn so much, but we're all human and we make mistakes. And oh, what a tragic story. I am so very sorry. So when Havi was born, you didn't notice anything, I would assume.
No, she was beautiful and strong. When she came out and they put her on my wife's chest, she lifted up her neck and turned her head side to side, and the nurses said, "Oh my gosh, she is so strong. What an incredible baby." And it was like that for months. We were first-time parents, so we didn't really know what to expect.
Yeah.
And I think had we had an older child, maybe would have seen some of the signs of Tay-Sachs earlier on, but we really didn't appreciate that anything was going on almost until maybe 11 or 12 months, maybe in hindsight, somewhat before that.
And when you say something was going on, were there signs of regression? What was it?
No, she was just developing slowly.
Missing those markers when she went for well visits.
Yeah, somewhat. My wife just described it as that she looked like she was moving through quicksand, that things were a little bit slower or less vigorous than you would have necessarily anticipated. But you know, we saw it as like Hav being sort of elegant and smooth, and she had such a captivating personality. The way she looked at you and her smile, her laugh were so captivating that many of the physicians we saw, even after she was diagnosed with developmental delay, said, "She's going to be fine. She's so beautiful. She's so strong. She's so poised. She's going to be fine." And it wasn't until 15 months after we had taken a lot of steps to put her through early intervention and physical therapy and seen a number of physicians, she wasn't making any progress. And that started to be more of a hallmark that something.
And so then take us on your diagnostic journey. At what point did you know you needed more testing and find out about the Tay-Sachs?
Yeah, so at her 12-month appointment, we saw her pediatrician, and she said to us, you know, she's doing great. There's a few things that she seems to be a little slow on, and this happens with a lot of children, and we have these amazing programs called early intervention that help kids get up to speed, and I'll refer you to those. And I will also suggest that you see a few specialists in neurology, orthopedics, developmental pediatrics, just to have a more seasoned expert set of eyes take a look at her and confirm that there's nothing else going on. And so we went and saw neurology and orthopedics and developmental peds, and everyone said she's going to be fine. And it wasn't until that was Hav was born in September. We started on that journey September, October. It wasn't until after Thanksgiving in November that we saw another developmental pediatrician who gave us the diagnosis of cerebral palsy.
Oh, wow.
Which was devastating. We got back in the car, and my wife and I had taken separate cars to the appointment because we thought we were going to be going back to work. And I got back in the car after that and just sobbed.
Of course.
And
of course.
It was devastating. She said to us, Havi has a uncharacteristic history for this, but more and more we're understanding that there are genetic causes. So I'd like you to see this neurogeneticist at Boston Children's. And 2 weeks later, we saw him. He started that visit with a very thorough exam of Hav. And he sat her down on the floor, and I unzipped my jacket. And when I did that, she startled. And it was something we had been seeing, that she would seem to jump or startle in response to noises that you wouldn't expect. And it turns out that's a hallmark of Tay-Sachs.
Oh, wow.
He asked us at that moment whether we had been tested for Tay-Sachs, and we laughed at him because we obviously had. And said, of all the things it could be, it's not Tay-Sachs. And he went ahead and ordered a bunch of tests, including a test for Tay-Sachs. And 24 hours later, we got the result that it in fact was Tay-Sachs disease. Wow.
And how did you and Myra cope with the shock and the emotional impact of the diagnosis, especially when you thought you had been tested and cleared for Tay-Sachs?
Yeah. It's such a hard time, I remember I came home from the hospital. I had gone to the hospital to pick up a blood test from this physician. And we had gotten and he called me into his office. He said, can you come back to my house? And I knew at that point that something was wrong. And he sat me down and he said, he took me through some results, and he said, I'm so sorry, Hav has Tay-Sachs disease. And I don't remember much about what happened after that, but somehow I got back down to the parking lot and into the car, and I got home and came into the house, and Myra was on the phone in our bedroom, and I walked in, and as soon as she saw my face, she hung up the phone, and I told her what I had heard from Dr. Sid, and she screamed and she said, our daughter is going to die. And it was devastating. And she was 11 weeks pregnant with our second child.
My goodness.
The next day we were in high risk OB, and she had a chorionic villus sampling, which is like an amniocentesis, to test the fetus, who is now Kaia, our 3-year-old, to test the fetus to see whether she was also affected with Tay-Sachs. And fortunately, she's not. She's a carrier. She has my mutation, but that was a pretty
just a miracle. It's a miracle.
It is a miracle. Yeah. And then tell us about Havi. What foods did she like? What are some of the favorite activities you do together?
Yeah. Hav was amazing. She was so beautiful, had the most incredible eyes and smile. And, we would take her out on the plane to places to restaurants, and people would stop and say, she is so gorgeous. What an unbelievably beautiful child. And obviously I'm biased, but you know, she was just the most stunning. You know, one of the amazing things is that the only thing she ever really crawled for, and she only ever crawled just a few feet, was challah. We have
So
this
for our listeners, we will tell you challah is bread. It's something that is eaten on holidays, but not always. We have it
it's
every
really
week
an
on
egg
Friday.
bread. Yeah, it's an egg bread that's braided
delicious
and
bread,
yummy.
and it's soft and it's delicious.
Yeah. And we have a really fantastic bakery here in Boston called Rosenfeld's that makes, everybody thinks their own bakery is the best challah.
It's the best.
Yes.
This is the best challah around. And
okay.
And so that was one of her favorite things. And as a result of that, you know, that was part of this whole story of how we learned to live with her in a particularly profound way during her life. And that was this decision to celebrate her every week, to celebrate a birthday every week. And we did that on Shabbat. And so Shabbat became Shabirthdays.
Oh,
Celebrated her every week, every Friday, sometimes alone, but a lot of times with friends and family, and lots of food and lots of wine and long dinners. And she just loved that. She loved being at the table and, you know, being held. She was basically passed from arms to arms, you know, the entire time. And yeah, she just, the presence of family and love and tears and laughter was so much of her. It was really so much of who she was and what she brought out.
That was Havi still alive when Kaia was born?
Yeah, so Kaia and Hav overlapped 6 months. Which is such a gift, obviously, and to be able to have photos of them together is such an incredible thing.
Wow. And did she love being a big sister?
Oh, amazing. You know, just some of the moments, even she was losing a lot at that point, obviously. But you just see the way gestures that she would make towards Kai, you know, the way she would turn her head when she'd hear her voice, the way she was like calm in her presence. Kai is like got this just over the top energy and excitement, and Hav always sort of got this sense of calm when she was around Kai. It was an incredibly beautiful thing.
Oh,
what a wonderful tribute. I have to say, it's just beautiful listening. We all have a feeling about your blessed daughter. You really have done her great justice. I really am very taken with what you're saying. And, you know, you described the appointment with the doctor when you were told the prognosis of your daughter. So I wonder what you think about genetic counseling and how that sort of conversation would be so radically different for families thinking about having a family, and how they are going to navigate if if screening comes up, that there may be an issue, and how they make these decisions for their family.
It's a very good question, Beth, and a really important one, and I think reflects the challenges with our medical system that our experience underscores, and challenges that people face every day, and that are not a surprise or unknown at all. Our medical system is a disease care system. It's not a healthcare system. And
well put. Yeah.
And we don't do a good job at preventive care. And I think as I dug into what happened with Hav and what happened to us, what I came to really appreciate, which I knew in some ways from my own medical training and awareness of the field and the state of things, but we have in preventive genetic screening tools and capability that are very, very good. They are robust, they are high quality, they are well validated. Those tools can allow us to prevent people from dying. Those tools can allow us to prevent children from being born with rare diseases that are lethal or rare diseases that cause significant morbidity. Those tests can allow people to know cancer risk or cardiac disease risk and make changes to their lifestyle or to their screening plans so that they can identify those diseases early and intervene before they show up late stage when there is no hope. And the sad thing is that we don't use that technology hardly at all in our system.
Right.
There are pockets, there are certain providers and certain types of clinics where those technologies do get used, but generally speaking, we don't use those. And it's an educational problem, it's a system infrastructure problem, and it's a problem in terms of how that care is administered and supported. And it is really underscored by the point that there are only about 4,000 genetic counselors in the United States. That's approximately one genetic counselor for every 90 or 100,000 people. Wow. So that capability, those are the people who understand this information and understand what to do with that information and understand how to communicate that information. And we just don't have enough of them. Mm-hmm. We don't have enough of them for every clinic in the United States or every hospital in the United States to be able to keep them on staff to support patients through this type of journey.
But it may be a supply and demand problem. If there was more of a demand, the supply would increase. If more people were interested in genetic testing and the counseling, then more people would probably go into the field. Yeah, so I think that making people aware will benefit us all the way around.
Absolutely.
Well, it seems that I'm thinking about how your office visit with the doctor and this, you can't remember how you got home. I can only imagine. And the difference the conversation might have been with a genetic counselor where their life isn't at stake. That would have been a much more different conversation, a more rational conversation, a conversation where you could make an appropriate decision and really take time to consider what your options are.
Absolutely.
So I just think it would be a much better
conversation, and more supportive.
Yeah. And I will say, looking back on our experience, we obviously interacted with a lot of providers at all different levels, physicians, nurses, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and on and on and on. And one of the most meaningful relationships that we had during the process of Hav's diagnosis and throughout her life and even after was with our genetic counselor, the genetic counselor that we got introduced to in the OBGYN clinic when we went in the day after Hav's diagnosis for Myra to get her chorionic villus sampling. That woman, whose name is Michelle, was unbelievable in the way that she cared for us, in the way that she communicated with us, in the way that she helped to convey information and guide us through some very challenging and obviously.
Well, how lucky you were to find her as a resource, even if it was not initially, which would have been incredibly helpful. At least it was close enough thereafter that it could really be a resource and assistance and provide the support you'd need to get through what you were dealing with.
and is one of the reasons why I came to JScreen and immediately understood the.
And we have to tell listeners that we'll be speaking of JScreen further down the road, but JScreen is a wonderful group that does genetic and cancer screening for people around the country and around the world. Possibly. And it's just a really wonderful organization. And Matt has just agreed to be the new CEO of JScreen, and they are very lucky to have him, and he's lucky to be with JScreen because it really provides a service that the rest of the country needs.
Yeah, I couldn't say that better myself, Cathy. And I am so lucky to be able to join them and meet this amazing community that supports them, folks like you.
So you have described, I'm thinking about how you and Myra got through this difficult time, and you described a weekly celebration, which is a beautiful way to come together. I think that sometimes we hear about couples at time of tragedy sometimes drift apart, that the stress can be too much and they don't communicate, and it can break up a loving family. It seems as though you two have bridged that. I wonder, can you share the secret? How did you do that? How did you support each other?
I mean, I feel so lucky to have met and married Myra. I think a lot of the credit goes to her. And who knew? I mean, how could you know that something like this was ahead?
Young couple, yes, young couple having their first child. Who knew?
And I just got lucky, I guess, in meeting this amazing human being who has incredible strength and whose values are so in the right place all the time. And I think a lot of it also goes that a lot of credit needs to be given to our family. We were surrounded by and wrapped up by Myra's siblings, her brother, her sister, their significant others, my sister, her parents, my parents, and then a small circle beyond that who showed up in ways that I still have a hard time believing were real. And that level of community support around us and the way that they held Hav from the day of her diagnosis, literally through the morning she died, was sustaining in a way that is hard to describe, but I think is the reason why I'm here, the reason why we're here and still have a family together. It is incredibly difficult, and it hasn't been without its challenges, obviously, at various points.
Well, what role did your faith play in helping you navigate both the difficult decisions and the emotions associated with everything, all the challenges you were going through and the loss of your daughter?
Yeah. That our relationship with faith was and has been challenging. Tay-Sachs is a Jewish disease, is how a lot of people know it. And we obviously come from a deep Jewish tradition. On the one hand, we found tremendous support from that community and from the traditions of the Jewish faith. Birthdays were a great example.
I was just thinking of that. Yeah.
It became such an incredible way to honor Hav and do something that was sacred every week with her and with our community. And in many ways that probably or potentially helped prepare us spiritually for the transition of her life and being open to being forced to exist with her in a different way since she's died. And I think Myra in particular, but both of us have started to explore and become in much closer touch with a spiritual existence that is deeply rooted in the Jewish tradition and our Jewish identities and upbringings in a way that I don't think we would have had we not gone through this experience.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Wow. Well, how did you interact with friends and family? You were talking about how they were always around you and surrounding you with love and support. And was there something in terms of advice for how family and friends should react to someone in such need of support? And do you run the risk of ever overreaching? I mean, how do you walk the line and balance your needs, both in expressing yourself as well as the family or friends' need of having some level of space to really process what they're going through?
Great questions. This actually is an area my wife has now devoted her life to. It is trying to help people and families and communities learn how to show up for one another. It is one of the hardest things.
Yes.
Which is in some ways is very odd. It seems like a very basic thing to show up for others when they are struggling with something. But it is hard. It is profoundly difficult and complicated, and all of the societal trappings of how we're supposed to interact and how we're supposed to feel get in the way of those things in many ways. I think and my wife has started an organization called Emotion that is explicitly trying to do this. It's a beautiful organization focused on ritual and movement and community in dealing with grief and trauma and loss.
Oh, wow.
And many hard things. And she can speak to it much, much better than I can. But a few specific kernels from our experience is that I don't think there's ever an overreach when someone is going through a hard time. The thing that you need the most is love and support. And that can be expressed and conveyed in a lot of different ways, but we would never turn away love and support. And we would never turn away, in particular, someone showing love toward Hav. That was the most beautiful and powerful thing, when someone would come into the house and scoop her up and give her 1,000 kisses and sit with her in a chair for hours and not want to give her up. That was the best thing. And I think there were also great, meaningful, deeply impactful interactions from people who couldn't be here physically. And those kind of near but far type interactions, little text messages, or someone ordering a coffee under Javi's name and taking a photo of the order tag on the coffee and sending that.
Now that I would never have thought of.
Those are beautiful things.
That is a beautiful
absolutely
thing.
Beautiful.
And they showed us that she was present in somebody's life, that they were thinking about her
day to day. I mean,
and this was while Havi was alive. These were both
while Havi was alive and since then. And there is nothing that I love more than looking down at my phone and seeing a message from someone with a photo of lavender was like Hobbs color and Hobbs flower, and somebody sending a photo of a beautiful landscape with purple flowers, or a coffee cup with her name on it, her name written in the sand on a beach with waves in the background. Those types of things, they are small things and they go so far.
You have really given us very concrete things that we can do. I think we've all been in a situation where we have a friend who is grieving and we don't know how to support them. I can remember there was a family at my child's school, and their son swerved to miss. He was a driver, so he was 16. He swerved to miss a deer, ran in. He had a terrible car accident as a result. And I will tell you that when I would see the parents, I would well up and start crying and somewhat run away from them, because I felt that I was bringing them more trauma, and I never knew how to support them. I think this is really this is something that's really important. If you can share sharing these sorts of ways that we can show our compassion, show our support, because you're exactly right. We've all had a lot of education, a lot of training, but we don't know how to do this, how to support people when they're grieving.
It is hard.
And we want to show that support. Totally. We don't know how.
Yeah, totally. It is hard. It is very hard. It's hard for me now with other families who are going through, unfortunately, similar situations to ours.
Yes.
To know what the right thing to do is, even though we had some of the best examples of that in our own experience. So there is a sort of feeling your way along point, but I think in some ways the things that we are afraid of are often the things that may mean the most to a family. Knowing that when I run into someone or I tell someone about Hav and they break down and they cry, and if I'm with them, we embrace that. That's amazing. That makes me feel like she has moved them, that she has impacted their life. I love that rawness, that fullness of emotion is powerful. That's where I want to live. I want to live in that space. And when people run away, it makes you feel isolated and makes you feel like something's wrong, like you're an alien, and that doesn't. We feel like
not helpful.
Yeah, we feel like that anyway. Losing a child kind of pushes you outside of the normal world in many ways.
Of course.
Now, are there any books that helped provide you with insight during this journey, and how did they help you?
Yeah, honestly, this is also probably one of the most transformative things that came about in our experience and continues, is that shortly after Hav's diagnosis, a family friend of Myra's gave us a book by a woman named Joanne Cacciatore called Bearing the Unbearable. And she is a professor at the University of Arizona and a bereaved mother herself, and a therapist who works in the space of grief and loss, especially for child loss. And that book was such a balm for us. It was such a clarifying, helpful place to be able to go on a regular basis. We basically made it required reading for anyone who came into our circle, into our bubble. And we were very fortunate. We actually ended up getting connected to Dr. Joe and working with her before Hav died, we would talk to her every other week for about an hour, and that was incredibly powerful work. And we still talk to her every few weeks now. She has a care farm outside of Sedona that her husband calls an amusement park for grief, but it's just a beautiful spiritual place where having lost a child is something that everyone there has experienced. And her model and her approach to this kind of tragic thing, I think, is ultimately the way that we need to exist. And she and that book in particular, I think, were transformative for us and life-saving in many ways.
Oh, how beautiful. And if I can ask, you mentioned you have a daughter, Kaia, and a son, Ezra. And I know that must give you such a force for continuing and living life to the fullest. But what steps did you take to prevent Tay-Sachs from reoccurring in your next pregnancies? And can you share more about this whole process?
Yeah, of course. And I think it is also our experience through that is another reason why I came to JScreen and why I think what JScreen has done is so profound and important. As I said, Myra was 11 weeks pregnant with Kaia, so we didn't have a real choice with her, and obviously got lucky that she's just a carrier for Tay-Sachs. But we did have that choice with Ezra, and so we chose to pursue IVF, in vitro fertilization, and use a test called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or pre-implantation genetic testing, where we can test the embryo and see whether that embryo is affected by, in our case, Tay-Sachs disease, and can then select the embryo or embryos that are not affected. And Ezra doesn't carry a mutation from me, and he doesn't carry a mutation from Myra.
Wow.
So should he choose to have kids and have kids with someone who's not a carrier, that mutation is gone from his lineage. Tay-Sachs is gone from his lineage. That is so profound. I think about it every single day, that with a relatively simple technology and a relatively simple approach, we have potentially eliminated that disease from his lineage going forward. And that's an amazing, amazing thing that we have the ability to do.
But Kaia will know when she gets older that she is a carrier, and she will know to be tested.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. So we've talked about JScreen, and which is this genetic, wonderful, as Cathy described, wonderful genetic testing and counseling service located at Emory University, which is in Atlanta. And thankfully, Matt, you've agreed to become the CEO. I can't imagine a more perfect match, and how wonderful for JScreen that you'll be there to spread the word. Your passion is obvious, and they're lucky, certainly very lucky to have you. So I wondered if I'm saying how wonderful it is. Can you talk about how you feel that your experience will impact your job and what you bring to the table for them?
I think for a long time, I have always believed that medicine and research and making new medicines was my vocation. I felt drawn to the field of healthcare from a pretty young age, and thought that it was a very powerful way to give back to society. And it is, by all means, it is. Now I am at this point where my personal life and my professional life have collided. And I cannot imagine any other purpose on this world than what I am doing right now. And it has made me realize what vocation truly is. And not to discount how I felt before, but I think maybe there was always a little bit of a part of me that didn't quite believe or wasn't quite sure that that was what I was supposed to be doing. And now truly this is why I'm here. I feel like this is why I was put on this earth and what I am supposed to do. And
what a remarkable and lucky statement that you can make. I mean, it's just truly remarkable.
Yeah, I feel really fortunate to have that, to be in that space and to have that opportunity. And it's a way for me to parent Hav. You both have kids. You know that there is not a whole lot better than being able to be a parent to your children, to be able to talk about them and tell your friends about them and interact with them. And I don't get to do that for Hav in the traditional way, in the normal way. And this is my way of doing that. I get to talk about her every day. Every time I meet someone new, I get to tell Hav's story and tell them about her. And that is an incredible gift. And I will also say that I would, for 1 minute with her, if I could have one more minute, I would give it all back for 1 minute. But yeah, I think to your question about why JScreen and what we want to accomplish in this next phase of its life, it is clear to me that preventive genetics and preventive genomics is something that should be universal. It should be something that everyone everywhere has access to because of what it can do to prevent disease. And our goal is to figure out how to do that and to bring it to everyone everywhere in the US and eventually internationally, and to make it part of the way we live, part of the way we exist.
And it's so easy. It's a spit test. I mean,
it's so easy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a spit test or a cheek swab that you can do in the comfort of your living room.
Somehow we have to get to couples and convince them to do this pre-genetic testing. And especially there are groups that seem to be predisposed to genetic defects. And it seems that Ashkenazi Jews are disproportionately affected. So Matt, we've had the privilege, Cathy and I, of interviewing parents whose children have a range of defects, such as Bloom syndrome, Wolfram, DF, that are genetic and seem to have a high proportion of Ashkenazi Jewish, affect Ashkenazi Jewish people. And my hope is that you and JScreen can reach that audience and get them to update their testing, update their screening. And I wonder if you have an idea of going into temples or reaching out to rabbinical students in schools, or where are you thinking, how are you going to reach this group that seems to be so highly disproportionately affected?
Yeah, it's a very, very important question, and it's one of the challenges that we have ahead for us. And the answer is we're going to go everywhere. I don't think that there's a single channel that is the right one or the magic way to reach people. I think we need to explore all of them. We need to explore Jewish institutions like temples and synagogues and JCCs and organizations like Birthright and Jewish day schools. And we need to go beyond that. I think compared to 30 or 40 years ago, the intermarriage rate is a lot higher than it used to be. And in many beautiful ways, Jewish communities have become more and more integrated into the broader fabric of American society and global society. And some of those traditional, quote, Jewish channels may not be the best way to reach everyone. So we need to think about alternative strategies to find and connect with people who may not be going to those types of places anymore. Because even if they're marrying someone who is not of Jewish heritage, they should still get screened.
Good point.
There are many cases, and I even have a very good friend who is of Ashkenazi Jewish descent himself and married someone who is not. And they, just a few years before Hav, gave birth to a daughter who had Tay-Sachs disease.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And it turned out that
in her background, there was Jewish ancestry.
Unbeknownst to her, that there was
a
long history of children who had died of neurodegenerative disease that looked and actually was Tay-Sachs, but nobody in her heritage knew about that. And he was screened and was shown to be a carrier, but because she was not of Ashkenazi Jewish descent and didn't fall within the typical guidelines, she was not screened.
Not tested.
Oh my goodness. My goodness.
Another example of, it's such a simple thing to do.
Yes.
It's such a simple test.
Matt, I think you should consider being in a documentary. I think that you all should, your beautiful family, I think that a documentary would be, and maybe you can get someone in HBO to pick it up.
Wait 1 sec. I want to go back to what you're talking about, testing and the family where they had Tay-Sachs anyways, and your family. And I'm wondering, once a couple has been tested, or you've been tested, do you want to retest, or do you wash your hands of it and say, I'm all done?
Yeah, I think where we are right now today, and this gets into a little bit of details of the testing, but right now the way testing is done is it's what they call panel-based testing. So they test for a certain number of genes that reflect a certain number of diseases. And that number has grown over time. You know, back in the 1970s, it was just Tay-Sachs. And for some period of time, it was 6 diseases and 9 diseases. And the number continues to grow because our knowledge of the relationship between genetics and disease get better and better with time as we learn more, as we understand more. And so those panels continue to grow. And just as a personal example, when Myra had the chorionic villus sampling, the CVS, and we tested Kaia, they ran a panel on Kaia, of 250 diseases. And today, right now, JScreen is in the process of implementing a panel of 500 diseases.
Wow.
So in 3 years, we have seen a double in the number of indications that can be tested for. And we're on the hyper exponential part of this curve. We are growing our knowledge of genetics so much and so quickly that the number of indications that we can test for is only going to grow. And that's true for carrier screening. It's also true for hereditary cancer screening, for hereditary cardiovascular disease screening, and more diseases and organ systems. We will be able to use this type of technology for lots of things in the future. And I think while in theory, you could ultimately do one test, sequence your genome, and use that data over and over again to identify possible risk. And I think that's the hope of where we'll get in the future. But for now, staying on top of where testing is and what the status is and whether there are new panels, expanded panels that could be beneficial to you. That's something that we offer at JScreen. People call in all the time and say, hey, I was tested 5 years ago. Should I be retested? Or, what's new? Should I explore doing something else at this point in my life, given more family history or more personal experience? So the short answer is absolutely. I think my hope is we'll get to a point where everyone has their genome sequenced and we can go back and just interrogate that data set when we want more information or when appropriate.
Wow. Well, to switch gears for 1 minute, I want to go to mental health is so very important, especially when you're going through medical challenges and difficult times. And I'm wondering, what's an activity that you do personally to reset yourself? Because you seem so together now, and I know now you've had quite some time to process, but during difficult times, what do you do? How do you reset yourself?
It's a really, really good question. I run a lot, and I run outside in nature. That nature has always been, the natural world has always been a very restorative place for me. I think it's a very humbling place and obviously makes you feel part of something bigger. It was also a place that we took Hav a lot. We explored the natural world in so many beautiful ways with her, from the mountains to the ocean and everything in between. And it's a place where I can go now to be with her and to talk to her and to listen for her, and feel her close by. And so that escape into the natural world, particularly on a long, quiet run, is a tremendously restorative and rejuvenative space. And actually a lot of the work that Myra has done in exploring how to manage grief and trauma and loss has uncovered a lot of work, scientific work, and Dr. Joe's done a lot of this stuff as well, that there is something really powerful about movement and about repetitive movement, in particular, running, walking, yoga. And she says this much more articulately than I do, but when we're in the womb, we are constantly exposed to the rhythmic sounds of the mother, the heartbeat, the flow of blood, the movement through the day. And there is something about movements like running or walking or yoga that recreate the same neurosensory pathway, re-stimulate the same neurosensory pathways that take us back to those very, very early days, those very, very formative days, and allow us to get into a bit of a different mind space. And I have found that profoundly in my own experience. Whenever I'm having a hard time, Myra will say, go out for a run, get out. And a lot of times we'll go together. And that's a place and a way that we can process together as well.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for being a guest today and for opening up about your family and your loss of your precious daughter, Havi. I also have to say, I am so proud that we could be a platform for you to advocate for genetic screening and genetic counseling, and in particular with JScreen. We are big fans here at It Happened to Me. We absolutely endorse what they're doing, and I'm so glad that we can help you get the word out. So young people out there, get screened. before you start your family. Get screened wherever you want to. It's easy. Just a spit test or a swab, as the doctor has told us. Please follow his advice. And give us these beautiful children that Cathy and I want to nurture. We love all these babies, Cathy and I.
Absolutely.
And so, Doctor, again, I thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you.
And sharing this wonderful, sharing the news and sharing this information. And I know that our listeners have gotten a lot out of this episode today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It Happened to Me. We encourage you to learn more at ithappenedtomepod.com. Please use the contact form on our website to submit your guest suggestions, comments, questions, ideas, and feedback for the show. You can also email us directly at ithappenedtomepod@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it if you can leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app like Apple or Spotify. This helps others in the rare disease and medical challenge community find us. It Happened to Me is created and hosted by Cathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman. I'm Kira Dineen from DNA Today, and I serve as our executive producer and marketing lead. Amanda Andrioli is our associate producer. Ashlyn Anokian is our graphic designer. And remember, it happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you. Thanks for watching DNA Today. To access all of our episodes, head over to dnatoday.com. We also have a lot of bonus content on there that you can enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, guest pitches, you name it, send them in to info@dnatoday.com. We'd also really appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more nerds like yourself find the show. Also, if you like giveaways and other ways to connect with us, I recommend following us on social. We're at DNA Today Podcast. We also have a Patreon if you want to be the most level involved in the show. That's also at DNA Today Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join us next time to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.
We're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA.